Hello, my name is Matt Romoser. I'm the swine field specialist in Southeast Iowa for the Iowa Pork Industry Center. And today I'd like to share with you some information around gilt development and some data regarding reproductive tract development and its potential use in your gilt selection programs. So when we talk about improving sow lifetime productivity, the conversation really starts at gilt development and selection and how we prepare and identify these gilts best suited to enter the breeding herd, hoping to find those that will not only maximize productivity, but also remain in the herd over several parities. Reproductive failure is the most common reason in which a female is removed from the herd, whether that be delayed puberty, poor litter performance, or delayed return to estrus post-weaning, etc. I think it goes without saying that retaining sows to later parities has its economic advantages. Specifically, those older parity sows have had the opportunity to offset their initial costs associated with purchase price and the costs associated with developing them. Additionally, those older parity sows, while maybe their litter metrics, total born and born alive, trail off with age, much data has shown that those sows also have a lower pre-weaning mortality and ultimately wean a higher percentage of their litter. Currently, age of puberty is the most predictive measure that producers can utilize when trying to evaluate a gilt's reproductive potential, and much research has shown that early reproductive development is positively correlated with sow retention. So to help illustrate this idea of early puberty onset being predictive of sow retention, I've got a few figures here. Start with the figure on the left where we've got gilts classified as early, intermediate, and late puberty, or gilts that really would have cycled between the days, between ages 140 and 180 days of age, and then compared it to gilts that would have cycled after 180 days of age. Shown here is the gilts labeled by the bar NS or non-select. And you can see here, we see about a 5 to 10% advantage in those early, intermediate, and late puberty gilts when we compare it to those that would have been termed non-select or cycled after 180 days of age. With the figure on the right, we're looking at probability to generate a litter, shown here with parities 1, 2, and 3, denoted by the blue, red, and green lines. We can see that as age of puberty increases, the probability to generate those respective litters declines. So then what are some of the challenges then with identifying early puberty or finding these gilts that reach reproductive maturity earlier in life? Well, first and foremost is it's labor intensive. And while I think it's generally accepted that early boar exposure is really beneficial from a reproductive standpoint, we're talking about exposing these gilts to boar maybe 60 to 80 days prior to us ever intending to breed them, making it really a time-consuming task. That being said, during that time, the technician could be identifying gilts for heat nose services. And really from a management standpoint, it's beneficial is then you'll know how many gilts you would expect to cycle for a given breed week. Could be facility limitations, whether you've got a offsite GDU or offsite quarantine barn. That makes it difficult to get the staffing over there to spend the adequate time to really start developing those gilts. Could be a situation where the sow farm receives mature gilts from their genetic supplier. And while there's some cost benefit here where you maybe don't have the feed costs wrapped up in the gilts, you're likely missing out on the opportunity to develop them reproductively. And for the last point, I bring up that gilt demand for the week may override what we term ideal gilt development protocol. An example of this, say we've got a gilt that would cycle at 30 to 31 weeks for the very first time. Maybe she hits the right window from a weight and body condition standpoint. And being that, the technician may be inclined to go ahead and breed her in order to meet breed target, despite much of the research at this point suggesting that a gilt that cycles that late in her life for the first time has a low likelihood of reaching parity 3. So given these challenges then, researchers at Iowa State set out to answer the question is, can gilts with greater reproductive potential be selected prior to puberty? As you might expect, reproductive development begins well before we can identify these gilts in standing estrus in the barn. And there's a lot of variation in rate of which they reach reproductive maturity, and shown here just a variation in follicle development that exists prepubertally in gilts. So we've got a picture here. We've got 2 ovaries from 2 gilts of approximately 100 days old. You can see that the ovary on the left is really non-active and displays no follicular development at this point, and is really just the opposite for the ovary there on the right, where we have substantial follicular development. And these follicles are a really important structure as they're producing the estrogen at low levels. It's acting locally on the reproductive tract and increasing that hypertrophy and overall reproductive tract size. So because of this variability, we then set out with the objectives in this first study, one, to identify a specific time point when a cohort of gilts demonstrates the most variability regarding follicular development, to determine the feasibility of measuring parameters related to follicle development during that prepubertal phase, those being transabdominal ultrasound, vulva development, body weight, and then lastly, to determine if any of those factors or phenotypes have a relationship with age at puberty. So for the experimental design, this study started with 155 gilts, all of comparable ages. And then on days 75, 85, 95, 105, and 115, specific prepubertal measures were taken, those being body weight, and ultrasound transabdominally, took vulva measurements, both width and length, blood draws at this point, and then at each of these time points, we sacrificed 10 gilts to record follicular development and uterine weight. So then for the remaining 105 gilts, they were exposed to a bore daily, beginning at 129 days of age, and that went on until a group average of 200 days of age. From there, then, we determined the association between the phenotypes recorded at those respective time points, and then correlate them to age at first estrus for the remaining 105 gilts. So when we first look at prepubertal follicle development, you can see that at day 75, these gilts really displayed no follicular development. As you continue to progress and increase in age, you can see that right around this time point is when that reproductive tract becomes active. And you can see by day 115, virtually all 10 of the gilts at this point displayed at least some level of follicular development. When we look at distribution of age at first estrus, we can see gilts began to cycle as early as 140 days. I believe group average age at first estrus for all those that would have recorded a standing heat on was 165. And you can see here in this figure that 26 gilts did not show first estrus prior to 200 days of age. When we look at the correlation between vulva width at day 105 and compare it to age at first estrus, we can see a tendency for significance. Whereas age at first estrus increases, we see a decrease in day 105 vulva width. When we look at the correlation for vulva width at day 115 and compared to age at first estrus, this time we do see a significant correlation where with the decrease in vulva width, we saw an increase in age at first estrus. Maybe the most interesting findings from this study came when we looked at the vulva area, or length times width, association with puberty by 180 days of age. So shown here, we've got three bars. The dark bar to the left of each column really is representing those below one standard deviation of the mean, or in this case, gilts would have been below average for vulva area and then we're looking at the gold bars there in the middle, where we're looking at gilts that would have been within one standard deviation or above, or really those what we would term average or above for vulva area at those respective time points, and then took it and looked at the percentage of them that reach puberty. So you can see at day 75 and 85, there really isn't much relationship here. However, when we look at days 95, 105, and 115, those below average for vulva area at this time were about 20 to 30% less likely to reach puberty by 180 days of age when we compare it to the remainder of the group. Similar findings then were seen when we looked at vulva area and their ability to reach puberty by 200 days of age. Again, really not much distinction here at days 75 and 85 vulva area measurements. But then when we look at the measurements taken at 95, 105, and 115, again, we see about a 20 to 30% less likelihood of those gilts below average for vulva area able to reach puberty by 200 days of age. So what are some conclusions and applications? From the study, researchers determined that prepubertal vulva width was negatively correlated with age of puberty. Variation in prepubertal vulva width had predictive value for identifying gilts with a higher likelihood to achieve early puberty. And then from this, in future studies, which will be included, really brought the idea of potential use as a vulva width as a biomarker for reproductive ability during development and selection. If you'd like information, I invite you to look at the published work for this particular study, or feel free to contact myself at mromoser@iastate.edu. Thank you.